All right, what's up, everybody? It's good to be back, like always. And yeah, we got a couple things on the docket today. I'm going to just chat for a little bit about some stuff, kind of last week's stream. I'm not going to spend most of the stream today. Like I said, I was going over that draft. After talking to Vero in the Discord, I think he had a good point. That's like not the most entertaining kind of content. But if you would like a heavy, like analytical recap of a draft, let me know, and I can always provide that if the community opinion is a little different. But I do kind of agree that that's not like the most exciting thing, right? So we're gonna go over, just talk a little bit. I'm gonna go over. I'm just gonna briefly say what I think went wrong in last week's draft. Just spend a couple minutes doing that. Not anything long at all. And then also I'm going to go over the new cards that have been spoiled so far. I think we have enough that we can kind of sit down and like have a conversation about what certain cards are kind of implying about what is to be released this weekend when official, like really the heavy spoiler season kicks off. I think enough has been spoiled to where we can start having like an intellectual conversation about what could be and what could not be, right? And so we're going to talk about that, basically encompass like what my thoughts are, what impact I think it'll have, things of that nature. And with that being said, the main topic for the stream today is basically we're going to be comparing things that I learned while playing poker. Um, I used to grind cash games pretty hard. I used to be in the military, and we got the autofocus on. Let me turn that off real quick. Can't stand it when it does that. Okay, we got that off. So when what's going on, chat? Thanks for being here. Like I was saying, I used to be in the military and I was stationed down in Biloxi, Mississippi, which is it's kind of, it's one of those towns where like there's nothing to do, but there's like 12 casinos. And I played a lot of poker. I really enjoyed it. I don't enjoy being in a casino. Like I literally will not do anything in a casino except for poker. Uh, except for one other story, which we won't get into. Alex will get a kick out of that if he hears it. But I enjoy poker because it is a very it is a mental battle. There is some luck and some variance in there, obviously, just like the card games that we play. But there's also a lot of similarities, and I'm going to be going over strategies that I use in poker. Back when I used to, my game of choice was No Limit Hold'em, and I used to play 1-3-2-5 pretty regularly. I played 5-10 a couple times, but that's a little up there in stakes. And I got a little bit uncomfortable with some of the flop sizing, having to pay, $100 to see a flop kind of thing. And so I kind of cooled it off. 2-5 is kind of like where I thrive the most. Not a big tournament player, but love the cash games. And I really enjoy playing poker. And there's just a lot of things that I've told people, and they're like, "Holy cow, that's that makes like perfect sense." And yeah, I think a lot of it applies um, to Fab as we play, and I think there's a lot of competitive edge to be gained in some of the things that I'm be going over. And it seems like such small stuff, but I guarantee you, provides so much value, so much value. Okay, so first we're going to talk about Worlds. That's on the docket, right? We still, unfortunately, do not have an announcement. If you do follow me on Twitter, I did mention that I'm kind of like worried about it a little bit. I don't know if everybody in I'm worried. I'm worried with how many people will make it to the venue for Nats with the casino. Yeah, I'm telling you right now, if I scrub out of any event, I'm going to play poker. That's just a fact. I just really enjoy poker. I don't know what it is about it. I just really enjoy everything about it. So if I scrub out, that's where you'll see me. Just playing some cash games and kind of chilling and stuff like that. But obviously, flesh and blood is going to be my main goal there, and we're going to be doing the best we can while we are there and going from there. So, Worlds, yeah, like I said, we still don't have an announcement. Unfortunately, at this point, I'm kind of worried that like something happened to the venue. Maybe, of course, that's all speculation. I have no idea what's happened or what's going to happen or anything like that. It's just like we're a couple months off from Pro Tour, which is where we were supposed to get the announcement, and we have not um, gotten like any update. So it's like a little too long for it to be like a normal. Oh yeah, we're just waiting for the contract to be signed. Organized play.eu. Like yeah, we're just waiting on some paperwork. No, this is like 2 months is kind of something bad had to have happened. I say bad. I mean like a venue fell through or something of that nature. Not anything like catastrophic, but just something that would like drastically delay the announcement as opposed to Nathan chips are the best chips. Yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely. For those of you who don't know, the card guys carry around poker chips, and if you run into us in a actual event and get paired against us, you can challenge us, and if you beat us, we will give you the poker chip, and that will be your entry for a future giveaway that we plan on doing. Hopefully, sometime relatively soon. I'd like to do it like around Worlds. We got to figure out what we're going to give away and stuff like that. We're all going to pitch in hopefully and get something going there. Um, so yeah, I'm kind of worried about Worlds. If they wait too long, I mean, it's gonna affect the attendance. It really is, and it does have me a tad worried to be honest. But we'll see. We will see. Second Monarch draft from last week. I went back and kind of studied it a little bit, reanalyzed, and obviously, like I was saying during the draft, I think I should have went Levia, but also there was an opportunity also in the draft to switch to Bolton. However, with that being said, I think I played it okay, and then somebody just hopped into chain last second because the packs were laid out in a way to where I needed to be chain or Levia. I should not have been Bolton. Because that second pick or the second pick in pack one had like 4 or 5 big Bolton cards, and if I would have taken one of those, I would have put somebody immediately into my left into him, which is what ended up happening. And taking one card out of there doesn't really change anything, especially because it would have been a red Valiant Thrust probably, and that's a rare. So if I could have went back, I definitely would have drafted Levia, but I think I did okay drafting what I was supposed to. I think somebody just pivoted in late and kind of really knocked down the card quality and made it where we just kept getting fatigued. And that's you just cannot be a 1 of 3 chain. It just will not work. That's just how it is. But that's okay. So yeah, we are going to go ahead and hop into the cards that have been spoiled, and I'm just gonna give you my thoughts on them, where they stand, things that we can pick out from them that would indicate what we expect future decks for those people to adapt to, things like that. So let me go ahead and switch screens. For those of you who don't know, there is a great resource, February, and they just have a whole section dedicated to Dusk Till Dawn spoilers. Anytime a spoiler happens, they throw it up here, and this is all that we have so far, which is actually a decent amount, right? It's not a little bit by any means. So yeah, we'll start up at the top. Why not? So we have our first Angel ally. Once per turn attack, costs 2, and it does not have go again on the card. However, we'll go straight to the prism weapon next, which is where the go again will come from. So it says When this card attacks, you may banish a card from your hero. So if you do, put a +1 counter on each angel you control. Okay, so it's basically acting as a shimmers for all angels, right? Um, Now we obviously don't know how this is summoned. We don't have that information yet, and to be honest, I don't think that's the important piece of this puzzle. Okay. And I'll explain why in just a sec. So here's the weapon. Uh, and if you haven't seen this in cold foil from the Armory promo, Will told me it looked fantastic. So, um, grab one of those at your nearest Armory soon if you can, because he said they looked amazing. So once per turn, instant. Okay, so you basically trigger on the attack or somewhere during the attack. Can also be during resolution phase. Target angel attack or attack action card with Herald in its name gains Skulligan. Okay, now the important part is it costs 2 resources to do this, right? And you can only do it once, right? And so already, attacking with the angel costs 2. Now, this could be like a more expensive one. There could be cheaper ones. We don't know that information yet. But what we do know is already, based off of the curve of this weapon and the curve of this angel, this prism should operate on not a yellow centric deck, but I'm theorizing a very blue centric deck. Because it seems like she wants to do things in 6 resource cycles, right? And now where am I getting that number from, right? So everything costs 2. Now, your knee-jerk reaction would be, okay, well, that makes it like a yellow deck, right? The problem is if you're pitching yellows to do these actions, it's super inefficient, right? I'll give you an example, right? Let's say you pitch 2 cards to one. You have to play this card, and we don't know how the invoke happens. So I'm assuming that's going to cost some amount of resources or something. But let's say you already have it out, right? And you attack and give it Kogan, and then you need to pitch another card for whatever you're swinging with next, right? Because you want to go again for a reason, right? Well, with that being said, you basically are giving up 3 cards to do 2 things: attack with 2 angels theoretically, or throw a herald, or whatever the case may be. We don't know what other options she has currently. We also don't know what a Figment is in her hero ability. We don't know what awaken means. That could be actually summoning these angels. We just don't know, and this also costs 2 resources. So I think a lot of Prism, basically is like, oh yeah, it's got to be yellows, right? It's got to be, it has to be yellow because that's how Prisms operated for the longest before. But I don't think that's going to be the case, because what I'm imagining is you pitch 2 blues, you attack with the angel, you trigger the weapon, and then you have 2 left over to either awaken another, or you have the opportunity to play a herald or attack with another angel, right? And that operates well on a 2 blue prism or 2 blue resource cycle rotation, right? And so that's my first knee-jerk reaction is I think the prism deck will be very blue heavy. I don't think it'll be yellow. I really don't. But we'll see. Also, this might be a little bit of a hot take, but I think, believe it or not, the health on this ally is the weakest part of the card. Okay? Now, let me explain that for a second. Okay? Why would 4 health on a that's like a what's the Yndra has 6 life. Which one has? There's not a dragon that has 4, except for I think Dominia has 4. But why is 4 life on this angel the weakest part of the card? Well, based on the ward mechanic that we have found on a lot of the recent illusionist cards, both in Dynasty and everything that we've seen recently, like Wave of Reality and things like that, right? It seems like they're structuring Illusionists in a way to where you are basically building up a board state that has ward, and then you are protecting it, is the idea. Okay? So if you're protecting this angel, right? Because if you take damage at any point, the ward will trigger and the angel goes away, right? If you take 1 point of damage, all it stops is that 1 point of damage, right? So your job as the illusionist, I believe, is going to be to play very defensively, turtle, establish a board very slowly, and then eke out advantages, which is kind of, that's not how Prism operated before. Prism operated before on establishing the board state and then making an immediate heavy pivot for tempo. And then once she acquired tempo, she closed the game out. Yes, you're right. Miragai has 4 health. Correct. So, but because this angel has 4 health, decks that go wide can just attack it, right? So let's imagine that you have a deck that a Prism deck that is designed to protect ward entities, whether it be that aura that you drop down for 1 cost that does whatever at the end of the turn if it survives, right? Whatever the case may be, you're trying to protect these things with ward and then eke out value from them throughout the game. The fact that players can just attack the angels is kind of bad for Prism, because if you do default to that strategy, right, you're blocking out everything I have. I look at my hand offensively, I can only produce like 8 damage. I know you're going to be able to cover it up and then swing this at me. I'm just going to tag this angel, right? I'm just going to 0 for 4 it if you're an aggro deck, or if you're, Guardian, you hammer it, right? So I actually find it very interesting that they gave the angels health bars at all. I think maybe it was a little too good that they only triggered on the ward, right? But maybe like mentioned in chat, maybe the figments have something to do with a way to protect the angels, because it seems too easy to just tag this angel for 4 damage and then not worry about it, right? Because it is not as easy it's not going to be as easy to establish this card as, say, a dragon in Dromai. There's no shot. So I think that the weakest part of this card is actually the fact that it has health. I think that's going to be very, very important in the future, and because I think they're just trying to steer Illusionists in that way. Okay, so that's enough about Prism. I think we spent like 5 whole minutes on 3 Prism cards. Okay, so United We Stand is kind of cool. It's just a PvE card. Unfortunately, I don't think there's any competitive viability in this card, simply because you get the whole effect is unity, but it's unity. Do you think it will have Phantasm? I hope not, because then it just gets even worse. If the angels have Phantasm, I think it's a bad hero, or you're just not going to play the angels if the angels have Phantasm. I really hope not. Plus, this character being taken out by a blocked CNC, that doesn't seem right. This chick's badass, right? So United We Stand. Like I said, all the effect is just unity. And all of these things give approximate, no matter who you are, which it is a light card, so you have to be either Boltyn or Prism. Prism getting a Spectral Shield is worth approximately 1 value, but you're having to block 2 to get said value. Now, Prism could run this, because this is not an Illusionist action, so it is a popper, theoretically. And a Spectral Shield, depending on how the deck is built, could actually be worth the unity effect on a 2 block, right? That's where this gets in trouble, is the fact that it's incentivizing you to block with it, but it's shitty at blocking is the problem. I believe LSS wants to give heroes a chance that can't go wide like Azalea. Absolutely. Absolutely. Emperor is pretty strong. I don't know. And then Bolton would be getting a courage token, which we'll see what that ends up being. But I just don't like the fact that it's Unity and it's incentivizing you to block with a 2 block. And other than that, it's just a terrible card to attack with. Diabolic Offering. So this is, Mansant broke this card down very well in his stream. I think his thought process went exactly the same direction as mine. I look at this card as a defensive card. Okay. So if there's any way that you can, during your opponent's turn, put a 6 into the banish zone via like Mark of the Beast or Art of War or whatever the case may be to turn this on, maybe Shadow Brute will get a piece of equipment that'll turn this on effectively. But with it being a blue, if triggering this is at all, if it at all becomes easier, then it gets good really quick. If it's like current Levia, where there's no unique way to do this on your opponents, because it having 6 attack is not like super relevant. I mean, it is a blue, but like it's a situational 6 blue attack kind of thing. I just like the fact that it's a blue strip, so it's universal. There's low opportunity cost, other than it literally does nothing unless the condition's met. So it's one of those risky blues. Anthem of Spring, we already went over that. That'll be a staple replacement for So Tomorrow. Northern Winds, not that it matters anymore because Oldham is LL, but real quick, I think everybody thought that this card was broken from the get-go. I did as well. But then the judge, the head judge, Joshua Scott, I think is his name, did clarify that the freeze is only for 1 turn, which actually makes the card pretty bad. Turns off your rouse because it's a blue. It doesn't block well. It is an ice card, but you make Spellbane Aegis token, so it might be good against Icelander maybe, but that's about it. Yeah, just not a great card once we realize that the freeze is only for 1 turn. But if it was not, it'd be busted as hell. I'll tell you that much. Call down the lightning. This is Lexi specialization. I'm not too high on this card. Embodiment of Lightning in Lexi should be just read as +1 damage, right? Because you are, well, okay. I guess there's a little bit more to it. Actually, there's really not. So what it is there's 2 ways to look at Embodiment of Lightning in Lexi, right? The first way to look at it is it just has a value of 1 damage, right? Because if instead of giving the next arrow go again, you can just give it +1. Therefore, it takes the Embodiment of Lightning and still has go again, whatever the case may be, right? And so the Embodiment of Lightning will theoretically have a value of 1. The only other situation that I can think of is if you Heat Seeker and you have 2 arrows and you don't have snaps, then it can get you an out as far as getting 2 arrows out of arsenal and being able to play your turn normally. The problem there is, like, when do you need to do that and you block with 2 cards to trigger Unity, right? Like that would literally have to be like the perfect lot. The only situation is like you have a 3 of a kind in hand, you block with 2 cards, and you have a Heat Seeker trigger that happened last turn. Those 3 things make this a good card. Other than that, it's so average. It just it's not doing it for me personally. The dealing 1 damage part, you're spending a whole card to do a little bit of damage. Yellow non-attack action is at such a high premium in Lexi, you should never consider that effect. Think of your codexes, your razors, your there's just so many good cards that would be better in this spot. Starstruck. Now this is an interesting one, right? Um, Obviously, when we look at this card initially, we have to like lay Crippling Crush over the card, and we have to say, okay, we're looking at similar stat lines. They both come in for 7. This one comes in for 1 less damage. We'll get into why that's important in just a second. And the effect is bonkers, right? Unity is kind of cool. It gives you a seismic, but I'll also explain why the Unity effect kind of. I'll get into it in a second on why the Unity effect is kind of like not the way the Bravo deck I think has to go. That's not as big of a benefit as you would think, right? So the crush effect is when it deals 4 more damage to a hero, only attacks they may play or activate during their next turn, or attacks with base attack greater. It says base attack greater than damage dealt this way. Right, so unless you're Guardian, basically, if this hits and deals 4 damage, I mean, it turns off most heroes, right? Most heroes will not be able to attack. It's just like a time walk, essentially, right? So, like, that's cool and everything. The effect on the crush is fantastic. By the way, it says attack, so it includes your weapon attacks, it includes attack action cards, whatever the case may be. So, there's a lot of things that, I mean, Icelander, it wouldn't affect because, you're just trying to wound a bull. It doesn't really affect Wizard at all, but I mean, and it's yellow. So you're getting a Crippling Crush-ish kind of situation out of a yellow. Now, the worst thing about this card specifically has nothing to do with the card. Anybody that's played a day of Bravo or even played against a lot of Bravo knows that the red power card slot is so tight, right? You have Spinal, you have CNC, you have Crippling Crush, you have I think some people were playing like maybe 1 disable, and you got Red Pummel. Some people are running Sigil, things like that. The only slot that I see this card filling, you can't take out Spinal, you can't take out CNC, you can't take out Crippling Crush. I think the spot that this fills is Chokeslam. Okay. Now, Chokeslam is a great card, but with that being said, and this is why the Unity effect I think is not as amazing as we first read, is because the whole reason you would want to run this Unity effect is to be able to block with this and then 2-card Chokeslam. But to defeat this in the deck, you have to take Chokeslam out, right? And you kind of, what this card provides is that extra threat where it just completely shuts down their turn, right? So you have Spinal, Crippling, Starstruck, CNC Pummel now that just like destroy the opponent's turn, right? And you also have Terra Sunder and things of that nature, right? So we're getting enough threats to where Bravo can more consistently just have that chain of turns where he's super disruptive and just doesn't give you the chance to breathe, which is good for him. But it means that the deck will kind of turn more toward like Feast or Famine kind of thing, where Bravo's not going to be able to sit around in mid range. So I think this card will push Bravo into much slower or much faster and kind of going away from the mid range plan altogether. But overall, I think it's a great card. 10, you have to ask yourself, what's the difference between 10 and 11? Uh, Unless they're using a D-React, it's not that much. This card does get shut down by a D-React and a card and no armor. Uh, so that is kind of unfortunate. Whereas Crippling Crush, it would be D-React, a card, and a piece of armor, right? Is what you need, assuming the D-React is 0 for 4, of course. Um, so yeah, I think it's a good card. I think it'll be played in most Bravo decks, and it will shift how the Bravo decks operate. Is what I'm guessing. Chorus of Iron Song for Dory. The unity effect is blocking with 2 cards. You get Courage. We still don't know what a Courage does. It also says until the end of turn. It is a reaction. And it costs 1. Target downblade gets +1, and damage this would deal can't be prevented. So I think this is a good sideboard card against Prism. Any kind of ward. If a deck ever leans heavily on Oasis Respite or any cards like that, I think this will be a good tech card. I don't think this will be a mainstay. If it was a blue, it'd be disgusting because you would have no opportunity cost and you just utilize the unity effect, right? But it being yellow doesn't really fit great into Dory's cost curve and what she's trying to do unless you change what Dory's trying to do and you move away from those overpowers and things like that that really rely on the blue count and go from there, right? So overall, I think it's pretty good, but not amazing. Pretty average. Not going to go over this card. I don't even know how to evaluate it because I only play, competitively. I don't mess around any like UPF or anything like that. I've never played a Shiana deck. I've never played against one, I don't think. And yeah, so I wouldn't know how to evaluate this card if I tried. So Flicker Trick. Mirage is basically a reverse Phantasm. Instead of it defending a card on defense, popping it, this will be popped if you block something with 6 attack or more. So it's just a reverse Phantasm. I think it's actually pretty good. I don't hate it. This is a Majestic, so this is the only color we'll get. So there's no blue, yellow, whatever the case may be. It blocks for 5. Now, why is 5 important? Well, 5 is slowly becoming the new 4. There's a lot of decks like Lexi is what I'm looking at very specifically, that this card goes very well into. And you're like, well, what if they play Rain Razors, right? And they pop this card and basically delete a card for free. Well, which arrow more than likely is going to come in for 5? It's usually the second arrow, right? Most of the play patterns are 0 for 4 with go again, and then maybe another arrow, and then the arrow from Arsenal or whatever the case may be. So if you just save this for the second or third arrow, then they don't have a Razor Reflex or Rain Razors. I'm sorry, and if they do bank it for this card that they have no information on, then they lost value anyway, right? And so it's still blocked for some anyway, if they try to trick you on it. So I think it's actually pretty good, especially if my prediction on the if the illusionist going more control and trying to protect ward, the 5 breakpoint could be very important. We'll see though. This is going to be a card that is not always included. I think this will be a card that kind of attacks certain metas, kind of like That's All You Got, whatever the case would be. Obviously, it's not a generic card, but I think Illusionists will treat it in a similar manner. Lost in Thought. So everybody's comparing this card to Thoughtseize. I've already went over it kind of a little bit the last week, and I think this card is good, but not as good as a lot of people are making it out to be. The reason is, let's look at it from a strict value perspective, right? You look at the opponent's hand, you put a card, attack action card specifically, And if they have one, which if they don't, they got bigger problems, right? So that's not really a factor. They put the card on the bottom of their deck. So that is -1 for your opponent. But then they get a ponder token, right? So that is a value wash. The only thing that you can extract from that transaction is the value delta between a known card and an unknown card. And that's going to delineate from basically what type of opponent you're playing, right? So take a deck like Briar, where you can take her only attack action card and she could draw some shitty blue off the ponder, right? That in that situation, there is a big delta between those two cards and it's not a wash. Whereas Guardian, it's like, okay, like, well, I guess Guardian, could draw a crappy blue now that Oldham's gone. You can't just Crown of Seeds it. So against Guardian, it could be good. It could be any deck that can utilize most of its cards and just arsenal almost anything like Lexi. This card is awful, so bad because you're getting relatively the same value to your opponent. So against Ranger, it's a zero effect on your opponent. You're just picking which card's not coming at you, but at the same time, it is a net negative for the illusionist player, right? It costs 1. So it's a whole card and a resource to do either swap cards for your opponent or I really think this is just anti-Runeblade in Guardian. I really do. I don't see any other application where this is really really useful other than those. Anybody that operates on a hard ratio of attack actions and they can brick by not having set attack, I think this card's good enough. This one was just spoiled today, I believe. So it's a generic blue. D-React costs 0. If the attacking hero has drawn 2 or more cards this turn, prevent the next 3 damage that would be dealt to this hero. Now, that's pretty interesting. It blocks 2. So the cap, so the floor is 2 value and the ceiling is 5. Now, you have to ask yourself, what is, anytime you're looking at D-Reacts, you have to say, what is my opportunity cost, right? Well, in this situation, the opportunity cost is actually very, very low, right? Because one, you're only going to play it into decks that, like, this is a meta attacking card, just like That's All You Got. That is what this is. The difference is, right? Look at That's All You Got. It blocks for 3 and possibly draws you a card, which, if you look at from a value standpoint, is the exact same value as this card. That's All You Got, blocks 3 and draws a card at the end of the chain if the condition's met, which is a value of 6. It's a yellow. This is a 5 on a blue. They are the exact same value basis. The difference is that That's All You Got did not work well in cards that operate on a blue resource base, right? Whereas this one can, right? So if we ever see a meta where we have a lot of Art of Wars, cash in for Viserai, notice it says prevent the next 3 damage, not the next source, not the next attack, not anything. This will stop Rosetta Thorn in its tracks. This will prevent Rune Chance. I mean, you name it, right? It just does it all. You block with this bad boy and, like, it just does a lot of work against Lexi with 3 of a Kind, ninjas with Art of War, cash in for Viserai. You have who else is drawing cards? I think that's pretty much it as far as like being able to reliably kind of execute it. So if you ever see a high uptick in those decks, I think this is a great card. I think this could be the next This Round's on Me, or This Round's on You. I think it is this round's on me. Yeah, I think this is the next this round's on me. Um, where it's like a tech, Fi came out, everybody started running it. I think if Three of a Kind, two steps the ban kind of thing, I think this would be a good card. It's a blue. Don't look at it as oh, it's a 2 block that's situational. Well, when a card is situational and it's blue, you can do anything you want with it, right? Like you have options, and it still blocks. Now, if this was a no block, but you get 5 value if the conditions met, then this card becomes terrible, right? But at worst, it's a blue 2 block, right? Which is not the best thing, but it has a lot of potential upside. And the fact that it's splitting damage, I think this is a great illusionist card, believe it or not. If they do go the very defensive route on protecting the ward, I think this card is fantastic because it carries over. It doesn't say the next instant. It says the next 3 damage. So if a deck goes 4-4-4, they can block this and prevent like all the breakpoints, like no problem, right? I think it's a great card. I think it's fantastic. It's not going to be a staple per se. In certain metas, it will be, just like this round's on me. Okay, so now we have to talk about Boltyn. We're gonna go ahead and talk about these the 6 banner cards. We'll go ahead and hit those. And well, I guess before we talk about the banner cards, let's go ahead and hit these last illusionist cards so we can get completely off of illusionist. So it's a 3 set, blue, yellow, red, and it's 4, 3, and 2 for the attack. It is an instant. It is a light illusionist. So sorry, Dromime, you can't run it. Target attack action with Herald in its name gets +2. So obviously it does not apply to the Angels here because they do not have Herald in the name. But I mean, this is great for like if you were to ever make a like Herald Rushdown deck, I think it's pretty decent. It is an instant, right? The thing that I like about this card is the fact that you don't have to invest in it until you know you're safe, right? Because it's an instant. You can say, okay, I'll attack with Herald of Protection or whatever, and they block 7 and they don't have the popper. Well, then you can play this and secure that Spectral Shield or whatever the case may be, and you are good to go, right? Do I think it's worth playing? That's a whole nother discussion to be had. I don't think it's amazing by any means. It just depends on what the meta is, and if Prism ever has to go zoom, I think this will be a card that will be probably used. It's a 0 for 4, especially because Prism can no longer go wide due to the absence of Luminaris. I think this is a good, way around that to kind of really go taller rather than wider. This might just be how like her aggro version has to be played. Is kind of how I'm looking at it. I don't think it's the best card in the world, but I think if the devs take Prism in a certain direction, it might just be a card you gotta play. It could be, not 100% sure. There could be like 2 versions of Prisms, like where you go Protect Ward and then you go Herald Rush, right? We don't know, but that would be my guess. Okay, so we'll go ahead and talk about. We'll go ahead and hit up the banners. Okay, so all 6 of them. There were 6 of them spoiled. They have the Soul Flare keyword. Now, for Soul Flare, right? It's obviously a buff of some manner, right? The problem is, it is a buff. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think it's the buff we were looking for. I think there's more to come. The way that I look at Soul Flare, especially in the eyes of a Runeblade player, right? In Rune Blade, you have to balance what's your main ratio. Your main ratio is attack actions and non-attack actions. Warrior has a reputation of being very consistent. Running Soul Flare cards, especially when you start increasing the amount of them, you start getting in like really weird territory where you're trying to balance, draw a card that charges, and then you need a Soul Flare card, right? Now, I think there'll be a Majestic that has both, and I think that card will be the biggest staple on the planet. Um, that would just be so cool if there was a card with Soul Flare and it charged. I think that would be too good, though, and they would probably have to make it a Majestic to kind of limit the number. Couldn't do all colors, or it would just be an auto include more than likely. But I think this will be like pick the most relevant 6, so 3 of like 2 of them, and kind of insert it into the deck. I don't think you're gonna run like all of them by any means, because on their own they're not doing enough. Playing a 1 for 4 is not where you want to be when it doesn't even charge, right? So you can look at the stats and say, oh, well, that's pretty good rate. 1 for 4 yellow that blocks 3. Like, that is a good rate. But that is a terrible 2-card investment, right? Even with a tunic counter, that's bad if you're playing this offensively, right? Because you could just play Scar for Scar. Like, it just, it obviously not in Boltyn. Boltyn's not doing a whole lot with Scar for Scar. But you get what I'm saying. I think as a whole, Boltyn will pick the 3 or 4 best, or the 2 or 3 best, and kind of insert it as charge fodder / yellow pitch. Also, I'm very curious if the Boltyn deck kind of goes more in the direction of acquiring blue pitches, and if that ever does, the value of these decrease even further, because the dream is like, this is a resource card, this is a Soul Flare card, and at worst, it's a 3 block or a lousy attack. The 0 cost ones are a little bit better, but the Soul Flare effect are a little worse. I think this one actually gives us a little bit of information as far as what is to come in the set. Obviously, there is currently no way in the game to charge your soul on the defense. Like, there's no way. You can say Soul Shield and you can say Halo of Illumination, but that is not charging. That is just putting a card in your soul. Those are 2 different things, right? So there is currently, that I'm aware of, there is no way to charge on your opponent's turn. So this card, in the current context, does not make sense, which does mean that we will get a way to charge on your opponent's turn, right? And maybe it's a piece of equipment that says, instant, you can charge a card and it gains armor value or something. Like, that would be really good. Like maybe it blocks like 1 or 2, and it says instant, you can charge a card, and if you do, this piece of armor gains whatever 2 or 3 block, and kind of just jam it or whatever. Would be kind of cool. But other than that, this does tell us there's a way to charge. It could be a D react as well. Could just be like a 0 for 5 D react or something that says when you play this you can, or it'd probably be a 0 for 4. The problem is like you have to charge this, and then the opponent also has to attack, and you have to have the card. That's why I'm thinking it has to be on equipment. Is because that's too many things that have to happen for it to line up. Just doesn't bode well. But it does apply to itself as well. Obviously not if you charge it, but if you have a second one, it is an attack action. It would apply. Other than that, I think the best one is going to be the Courage Token one and the Quicken. So I think Gallantry and Courage will be the 2 most popular, followed by maybe the Life one. It does say if it hits, though. Um, so that would be my top three currently. We'll see what that ends up to be, but that's my educated guess on Bolton and kind of what he is headed toward. We just have to be careful about not throwing just all of these into our Bolton deck. That's going to get very risky very quick. Wouldn't it be better to just block with it? Well, it really depends, right? Yes, you get a static 3 value. You always get 3 value on blocks from Warrior unless you have a D react. But Bolton operates in a manner where you have to be charging. That's where he gets his value is go again and stuff. So you have to be charging, right? And Soul Flare is just a way to extract value from a negative mechanic that is charging, right? They've just created a charge fodder that creates an abstract ratio in your deck that you now have to build around, but it does improve the deck. It absolutely does. Okay, so last one we have is Vincent, her weapon, and Phantom Banshee. So the reason I didn't go over Prism too much is we don't know what a Figment is, and we don't know what Awaken is. There's no real point to go over. As far as ABC, always be charging. That's a fact. That's a fact. So for Vincent, I'm not too high on her hero ability, to be honest. Also, for everybody, assuming enough cards have been spoiled, next Wednesday's stream, I'm going to probably start a little early. We're gonna hop straight into it. I'm gonna break Vincent. That's the goal. I'm gonna figure out all the cards, the best combinations. I'm probably gonna go for 4 or 5 hours just trying to break this hero and figuring out what the best way to play her specifically is. So if that's something you're interested, please join me next week, and that is on the docket. Assuming we get like the box breaks and stuff like that, and have the appropriate amount of spoilers. So the hero ability, I typically like to play my Rune Blades, especially Briar, kind of very mid-rangey, where I just try to play the value game. The one thing that I think is very fair about her ability is the very first part. It is not a May ability. It says you must banish at the start of your turn. You have to banish a card from your hand if you do make a rune chant. What does that mean? Well, the big part is it forces you into a play style, right? What it essentially does, it forces you into playing RuneGate. Because if you're not playing RuneGate or Blood Debt cards in general, then this card becomes very bad because you're translating one card to one value, right? And like you can't run generic dot deck with this hero and this current ability. You can't do it, right? If your hand is 3 Scar for Scars and a Snatch, and your turn starts, and you have to ditch one of the Scar for Scars for a rune chant. Like that's just terrible, right? So it does kind of, which don't get me wrong, I think this is the correct way to go about this from a dev perspective, because Rune Blades, if you look, have historically taken advantage of just being able to play the best generic cards and have the least amount of class identity. So this is a great way to fix it. You force people to interact in a certain way, and they've done that in a great way, I believe. So it does kind of force you into the Rune Gate, or at least the Blood Debt kind of play style, if you will, due to her hero ability. And for those of you who don't know, Rune Gate is basically Amplify the Arknight, but it's all or nothing, right? So whereas Amplify the Arknight, it's cost 3 and it's discounted by 1 for every rune chant. This is if you have 3 rune chants, you can play this for free from Banish Zone. instead of paying its cost. It's all or nothing. You can't pay what's left over or anything like that. So my initial reaction is the first thing I'm going to try with the deck is go on a kind of 2-turn rotation cycle where you basically see it gets even more difficult when you try to theorize with it, right? Because I was going to say a 2-turn cycle where you spend your time basically playing like a read the runes to generate rune chance, and then you have to arsenal it is the problem, because if you're getting rid of a whole card, even if it's like, let's say you got this card and read the runes in your hand, right? The obvious line would be at the start of turn, you banish this card, it goes into your blood debt, you play the read the runes, and the next turn you can just play it from banish zone, right? The problem there is you diminish the value of this card because you're taking the blood debt at the end of the turn, right? Does that mean that it's still a bad value? Well, let's analyze the situation. So you banish this card, which nets you 1 value, but that cancels out because you're going to take the blood debt, right? So that's a wash. The hero ability and the blood debt cancel each other out. So then you have a Read the Runes and a Phantom Banshee 2-card investment, right? And it produces 10 damage if it's red. So 2-card 10. That's pretty good, right? It in no way has go again. The only problem is you can't do that every turn because this card doesn't have go again, right? So the interesting part about the hero ability is you're going to have to play based off of what your opponent's trying to do, right? Because if you're playing against a very aggressive deck, then there's a very easy line, right? You read the runes, banish the Phantom Banshee, and then you block out your entire hand and then just play the Banshee from banish zone. That's great value. But if you're playing against a more mid-rangey deck that's actually blocking and interacting with you, that line no longer makes sense. You need something to do with the other 2 cards you don't block with, and you don't want to load up the banish zone and take more damage, right? So it's going to be very interesting. I hope that we get more non-attack actions that give more non-attack actions with blood debt to kind of smooth out this cycle, but I could see how that could get very dangerous. We've seen Seeds of Agony and how that works. But that's currently where I stand. I think it's going to work on a cycle. It's going to be very mid-rangey kind of thing. And the second part of the hero ability, I'm not super excited about. I don't think it's bad. But what I do think is this will be a great way to guarantee that you keep creepers, right? That's the way that I'm looking at this card. It is a May. You don't have to pay every time you play a Shadow non-attack, right? But one thing that this hero can do is have a way to guarantee keep creepers or guarantee turn on, a meet and greet, whatever the case may be. So that is an interesting part of the effect. And let's not forget, we got Carrion Husk. Don't sleep on that. And the weapon, I think she's going to have a shield to go along with it because she is, quote unquote, an Iron Maiden, apparently. And I don't know, that seems very defensive in my mind. So I think there'll be a shield that pairs with the flail. On the surface, I do not like the flail. It's a 1-for-1. Literally, the only problem is it only becomes 2 if it hits, and it doesn't have go again. So I don't see a whole lot of why would you invest a card or effect to give something go again just to swing this? Kind of doesn't not jiving too much with the weapon, but we'll see. She is the one we have the least amount of information on currently, by far. So we will see as that develops. So that wraps up all the spoiled cards so far. So we'll hop straight into the main topic that I said we're going to go over, which is things I learned in poker that apply to Flesh and Blood. Okay? So the biggest thing for those of you who don't know, poker is basically a mental game where you try to extract as much value as you can, not from the cards that you get necessarily, but what you can get others to perceive the cards you have, right? Let me give you an example, right? Everybody has probably heard the term bluffing, right? Where you basically have a terrible hand or you miss the flop and you keep betting, make continuation bets, whatever the case may be, and everybody ends up folding and you take the pot, right? That would be considered a bluff, right? Now, one thing that I'm not going to go over in this video is implied odds, and that's because Yuanji covered it, I think, on Fino's channel, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm not going to steal that idea or content. So if you want to know about implied odds and how it applies to Flesh and Blood, go check that video out. It's a great video. I saw the first little bit of it. And he seems like he's another poker fan as well. And yeah, so we're going to go over a couple. I got 5 different points of things that I've utilized in poker that apply to Flesh and Blood. And the biggest one, I'm gonna start with the heat, right? The time that it takes you to make a decision more times than not is more important than the decision you make. Okay, let that sink in. Let that sink in. The time it takes for you to make a decision in Flesh and Blood is more often than not more important than the decision you made. Now, what do I mean by this? Okay. Let's say you're playing against a Briar. We're just going to use her as an example. Okay. And you throw an attack out, let's say Snatch, right? And I immediately tell you, no blocks. What did I just tell you? I just told you that my hand was gas and chances are I probably have a chin on my heroic. Right? If I immediately tell you no blocks. Now let's take the same situation and you play a Snatch and I think on it for a sec. And I say, no blocks. That's not as apparent as the first situation. It could be my hand just doesn't block well. I don't have an embodiment. Maybe the hand's not that great, but I kind of need everything to operate. Like I have 2 kind of shitty non-attack actions, but I need those to give the attack go again. And I think that it extracts more. There's other situations that make sense. But when you play the Snatch and I immediately say no blocks, that gives the opponent information. It gives the opponent a lot of information, right? It's why there's a term in poker called Hollywooding, right? Which is where somebody acts way slower. And it's an exaggeration of the concept that I just gave, right? Let's say that you are really strong in a poker hand. You have a full house or maybe 4 of a kind, whatever the case may be. And you kind of want the other person to kind of bet into you. You want to seem weaker than you are, so you kind of delay your decision making, even though like they raise and you're like, oh man, do I call? Even though you know you have the nuts, which is slang for basically you have guaranteed the best hand possible. And you basically sit there and think a while, because if you immediately call their raise, then that tells the opponent that you have a good hand, right? So you want to prolong that. Now, some people take it way too far and they sit there for 20 minutes and sit there, oh no, okay, I got the nut, like, you have to be respectful with it, right? Don't sit there forever. The point is, you don't want the decision to be immediate. You want some time to elapse. Now, some matchups, granted, you don't have that luxury, right? Because you have to play as quickly as possible. But in those matchups, I don't think those preconceived notions can actually, can be found. So that's the first big one is the speed of the decision, or how fast you make the decision, is more important than the actual decision itself. Okay? Very important one. How fast you make a decision gives a lot of information to the opponent. Okay? Let's talk about bluffing. We, a little bit before kind of mentioned a little bit on what that concept was. Pretty basic concept. Now, not all heroes or decks have the ability or the privilege to do things like bluffing, right? Because in a game like Flesh and Blood, where you draw a hand every single turn, everybody wants to use all their resources. It's not like, it's not like, holding something back or something like that. It basically comes down to, like, CNC Pummel is the best example, right? Basically, if you have the tunic counter, or you draw a CNC and a blue, but your tunic counter, is on 2 or whatever, and you're not going to be able to threaten the tunic pummel, so you kind of save it till the next turn where you can do it. That's kind of where you have avenues to execute a bluff. Another good bluff is like Sigil in Bravo. There's been a lot of situations where, he's holding 2 cards, right? So it's got to be a pummel after he dominated whatever or didn't dominate it. And you have the ability to just play the Sigil and then arsenal the other card. And sometimes you can get players to give you more value based on that perception or not. So I've heard of Bravo players not dominating on purpose, even when they didn't have a pummel, to get the opponent to block a certain way. So really, it's a guardian tactic, unless you just are building a pretty off the wall deck, kind of like my Beefy Briar, where you can actually run Tunic Pummel with CNC, and yeah. So that's another example of how poker would apply to Flesh and Blood. The next one is there's a concept in poker where you play the players and not your cards, right? So when everybody gets into the game of poker, they start learning things that are referred to as ranges, right? A range is basically where you are seated at the table based off of position. And position is just how soon or late do you act. When you act, you give information, right? So the later you act, the more advantage you have. And so your range is like, if you are in good or bad position, you play these sets of cards or don't play these sets of cards, right? And that's what everybody starts learning when they set out to learn the game of poker, right? But what they lose sight of is playing the game of poker is more about playing your opponents rather than the cards in your hand. Now, in Flesh and Blood, do you need to look at your hand and extract the most value every single time? 9 times out of 10, absolutely. However, there are several times in tournaments I have, based off of whatever factor it was, but I was able to basically, how do I put this? I was basically able to guess at the skill level of my opponent. and make certain decisions based on that. Now, let me give you an example. I'm not going to give you a person, but I'm just going to give you a play line that I use as Briar a lot that encompasses this idea. So, everybody knows Swarming Gloomville, right? For those of you who don't know, it basically has 3 modes for each for how many auras you have created that turn. The first one is it gains go again. The second one it gains +1, and the third one doesn't matter in Briar. So basically, I need to make an aura to give Swarming go again. Okay? So let's say I draw my hand and I don't have a reliable source of go again. But due to some action that my opponent has taken earlier in the game, I have maybe came to the conclusion that they're not the strongest player. One of the lines that I like to take in that situation is where I would typically block with the swarming, because I don't want to, let's say the hand, I didn't have a blue and it was, I don't know, nimblism, swarming, and I already blocked with a card or whatever. Or another 0 for 4 or whatever the case would be. My like knee-jerk reaction is I would basically block with the swarming and then just nimblism in 0 for 4 or whatever the case may be, and just go from there. And don't try to cash in on the Rosetta swing because it's too risky, right? Because the idea is you want to like nimblism in the swarming. If the swarming hits, you create an aura which gives it go again, and then you can swing your Rosetta Thorn. So if I've assessed the skill level of my opponent as being on the lower side, I'm more inclined to make that play of nimblism swarming because I know that it is more likely to hit, right? That opponent might not see, what's happening in that line that so much hinges on that Swarming Gloomville hitting, right? And that's a good example of playing the opponent and not the cards. Do I do that every single time? No, right? There's some points in certain games where you just have to do so if I've ever played a Swarming Gloomville or a nimblism swarming at you, that doesn't mean you're a bad opponent, right? What it means is like 9 times out of 10 it's just a situation that I'm in and it's like my only out, right? But play the player, not the card sometimes, and you can gain certain advantages in certain places where you might not otherwise be able to. So that leads me to the next one, is knowing your outs, right? So there's so many hands in poker where you reach a point. For those of you who don't know, there is different stages in poker. So there's a pre-flop bet. Flop is where the first 3 cards come out. In No Limit Hold'em, you're given 2 cards, 3 cards come out. Then you have the turn, which is the 4th card, and then you have the river, which is the 5th card. And there's a bet cycle between each of those. Okay, so there's a pre-flop bet cycle, post-flop, turn, and then river is the last one. Okay. So there's a lot of times during the turn or post-flop where you have come to the realization that the only way to win a pot is to basically bet at it, bluff. You could try to buy the pot as a term, right? Where you think everybody's just weak and nobody's going to hang around, so you just throw some middle in there, throw some money in the middle and trying to just take the pot, right? It's referred to as Nathan is a confirmed gambler. Yeah, just poker. Just poker. I don't touch any other casino games. I just used to be a cash game grinder down in Biloxi. Played a fair amount. Absolutely. So So yeah, knowing your outs is very important when as far as um, knowing certain spots when you have to execute certain strategies that may not be the normal situation, right? So um, just like the previous example, right? If I could realize that I'm kind of far behind in the game and I have to actually, now that Taylor's in here, we played during the last calling, or not the last calling because there was one in Singapore, but the Baltimore calling we played, and I believe it was in our match where I was kind of on. I was doing the whole Briar into Lexi thing where I was doing a very slow strategy, just kind of like outvalue them and kind of like play the game real slow, block a lot, kind of ordeal. And there came a point in our game where I drew a Channel Mount Heroic, and I didn't want to play it. 9 times out of 10 in that matchup, I actually block with Channel Mount Heroic rather than play it. But he had accrued so much advantage, or I think it might have been the fact that I was actually paying attention to his pitch stack, and he was kind of holding some. He did like a early like Rain Razors pitch or whatever, and I was like, okay, I have to kill him before he gets to that, or I get blown out, right? And so that was me recognizing my outs as far as just I needed to play that Channel Mount Heroic. Now, it just so happened in our game that I played the Channel Mount Heroic and then immediately drew 4 non-attack actions, and we don't win those. So we lost that one for sure. But I realized that I knew what Taylor was doing, and I knew what Taylor was doing would win him the game. So I had to do something that I wouldn't normally do to attempt to, kind of take the game. And unfortunately, it just didn't pan out. But that's variance, right? That's why we play card games and not chess. So that is a big one, is just knowing your outs. Okay. This is kind of like my last point that I had like written down. I got one, just this last one, and it's beak. It kind of goes a little bit with the first point that I made, where it was the speed of the decision that you make is more important than the actual decision you make. This one is just be careful of the information that you're giving your opponent by making certain actions. Since doing my coaching sessions, one of the number one things that I see people doing is they will make plays that in no way, just in no way require the sequence for the line to go a certain way, but they just play a card preemptively and just give that information to the opponent, right? Or structure things in a manner to where if the opponent is good, they can deduce that, basically this is what has to be left, or whatever the case may be, right? So the biggest thing is when you are creating your lines for your deck and your play in each individual games, be mindful of, ask yourself the question, especially when you're doing practice games on Tal Shar. If I play it this way, can I play it a different way that gives less information to your opponent? A very like ABC level example is like when to play Rain Razors, right? You don't play it during blocks, you play it in reactions, right? Unless you have to play it out of Arsenal to or before 3 of a kind or whatever the case may be. But if you're not under any restrictions and it's in your hand, you're obviously going to play it in reactions, not during blocks. Would be like a super basic example that hardly ever happens. But it could also be as simple as like when you're playing with Lexi, right? The arrow that you send first tells me a lot of information about the arrow you're going to send second that I don't know about, right? if somebody leads with an endless arrow, what are you telling me? Well, you're telling me that either you don't need this to hit because you would have sent something else, or you have a combat trick that's going to guarantee it to hit, or you have a better arrow or another one, right? So, understanding those concepts that you are giving to your opponent, the information that you're presenting to them by making actions a certain way, there might not be anything that you can do about it. That might just be the only line that you can take, right? That's completely plausible. But at the same time, you need to be aware. You need to be aware of, you know, what you are sending, what information you are giving to your opponent, so that way you can sometimes manipulate it, right? Like, what if there's actually a situation where you send the better arrow first to get the opponent to, just make a certain reaction that you're trying to get out of them, right? Um, it's entirely plausible. It really is. It really, really is. Very important. That's the number one thing that comes up in coaching, I would say, is people making lines that give away more information than needed. Um, so absolutely. So far we went over the cards that have been spoiled so far. If you missed that or you joining kind of late, feel free to go back and go over that. But that, unfortunately, this might be a short stream. That's kind of all I had for today. I did not want to do another Monarch draft. Just wasn't feeling it. Also, didn't want to do any CC because that's all about to get turned on its head, right? So yeah, that's kind of all I had scheduled for the stream. Unless chat, you guys have any questions, any topics you want to talk about, I'm all ears. I'm not like itching to go anywhere or anything. I am battling a Diablo 4 addiction, but that can wait. I've been grinding that game pretty good lately. But it's a great game, but that's a off topic. But yeah, if you have anything, feel free to ask away. I'm all ears. I just wanted to hop on for a little bit. Like I said, next week is going to be the big stream. We're going to break Vin's set on stream, guaranteed. Within 5 hours, I'm going to tell you the best way to play her. Just a fact. It's just going to happen. It may not be within 5 hours, but we're going to do the stream. We're going to get at least we're going to get really close. And then I'm going to ponder on it a little bit more. And we'll revisit it and probably spend the next 2 streams or so just kind of solidifying Vin's set, kind of determining whether she is a meta force to be reckoned with or not. Who knows? We'll just have to see what we got in the set. Super excited about the spoilers. Also, just kind of to give everybody my train of thought on where I am, like, as far as meta is concerned and what I'm kind of looking into currently. The first 2 things that I'm going to visit is not Briar, even though she didn't LL. I'm currently looking into Defensive Ninja and Warrior. Are the 2 strategies that I'm going to start with in the new meta. I think that with Oldhim leaving, I think everybody thinks that the meta is going to speed up. I think the opposite. I think the meta is actually going to slow down, especially if no bans happen to Lexi, because I think she will basically punish all other aggro decks out of the format. So you're basically going to have to operate on 2 axes. You're going to have to either, you're not going to be able to outrace Lexi. You're going to have to either do like a defensive strategy that executes more value, or you're going to, basically have to disrupt her with like Azuri or, Tumultai with Dromai, whatever the case may be. But yeah, so that's that's new Rune Blade maybe, just for funds. Um, yeah, we kind of went over it with the card discussion. Unfortunately, there's not enough cards right now to kind of theory craft yet. But definitely New Rune Blade on Wednesday after we've gotten most of the spoilers, if not all of them. We're gonna break it down. We're gonna go over everything you need to know about Vincent, guaranteed. That is the plan. Uh, yep. So if chat, you don't have any more questions, that's pretty much going to be it. Shorter stream today. I know. I think we're just in a low period for fab content right now. It's something I've noticed across the board. Everybody's just kind of taking a break off Pro Tour, and with the recent LLs, and everybody burned out from traveling for RTNs and things like that. I think a lot of people are taking a break. Also, a lot of other people are battling Diablo 4 addictions as well. So yeah, I think this weekend's going to turn it all around. I think after this weekend, everybody's going to be super excited to jump back in. There's going to be a lot more things to talk about instead of beating dead horses, or coming up with more unconventional topics, if you will. But once again, thanks everybody for joining me. I really do appreciate doing these weekly streams. They're so much fun. The feedback is phenomenal. If you have any feedback, please let me know. Whether it's positive, negative, does not matter. I'm all ears. Would you like to see more gameplay, less gameplay, more chatting like this episode, more, I'm here for you guys. So far everybody just loves the theoretical stuff. That's the most feedback that I got from Baltimore was people loved the way that I explain things. I'm trying to do that a little bit more. Maybe I need to couple that with gameplay to kind of like further push the ideas and stuff like that. That's something I will look into. But yeah, thanks everybody for joining me, and I'm out. And I will see everybody on Wednesday to break Vincent for the first time. I guarantee everybody's going to want to be here. If you want to know what the new hero is going to be doing, I'm going to figure